My name's Jeff Stewart. I am a wildlife expert and a cryptozoologist. I don't really like the term cryptozoologist, but that's the only term there is out there for what I do. Basically, I investigate unproven, unsubstantiated animal life, such as Bigfoot, chupacabra, or we like to call them here the Texas blue dogs, because they're not the quintessential Latin American chupacabra with fangs and big red eyes. They're more of a canine. And I have a background in animal science. I've spent probably the last 30 years investigating the strange, and if it goes bump in the woods, I investigate it. And it all began when I had an encounter at 15 years old while camping with what I would determine would be an old hermit in the woods. Because when I was little, we were told, watch out for the old hermit in the woods. And it was never called Bigfoot. It was never called anything like that. But Dad would say, there's old people that live out in the woods, And what I saw was on two legs, not big fur coat like you hear a lot of tales of, and which wouldn't make sense in Texas. Even summertime in Texas, if you got a fur coat on, you're in misery. But it had sparsely long hair all over its body and everything. And that started, I was about 15 years old, and that started me on my journey to find out what's out there.
So that wasn't the only time, though, that you had an encounter with something that someone would refer to as like a Bigfoot. So talk to me about the next time that happened.
The next time that happened, I didn't actually see it on the second time. My father and I had caught a large, what we call a mess of catfish, and we had put it in a live box and floated this live box out into the river, tethered back to shore with a rope to keep them alive until we were ready to clean those fish. The next morning we went down to retrieve our fish, and when we got there, the box, there was probably 100 pounds of fish or better in this box. The box itself probably weighed 30 to 50 pounds. So something had pulled this 150 pounds worth of box and fish up out of the water onto dry land. The lid was a spring hinged design with a latch, and it had been tied with rope. The rope had been untied. The hinge depressed and opened, and whatever it was had sat there and eaten the fish and threw the bones on the ground, the heads and the bones. And all around it were bare, what looked like human footprints. Now we're talking wintertime here. It was February, March. It was a 30 some odd degree morning. There was frost on the ground. Nobody's running around barefooted in the mud. And my dad turned and he looked at me and he said, "It's true." And I said, "What's true, Dad?" He said, "Those stories you tell about Bigfoot," he said, "that's the only thing that could have done this. What else could have done this?" There wasn't a coon wearing a size 17 basketball shoe running around there eating raw catfish in the middle of the winter. And that was the second time. Now, I had a third encounter where I did see it. I was looking for mayhaws to make jelly down in a dried up slough bed. And I had walked down this dried up slough bed, and I got to a certain point and I heard a crash to the left of me. And I walked over to look, and there was a limb probably about big around as a little bit bigger around than a Coke can, laying on the ground about 2.5, 3 foot long. And I'm looking up in the trees to see where it came from, and there's nothing in the canopy overhead big enough for this limb to have come from. At that time, I hear a loud thud behind me, and on that slough bed, the top was dry, but the bottom was still kind of a little quaky, and I felt it when it hit the ground, and I spun around, and when I did, behind me on the ground was, for lack of a better term, it was somebody. They had jumped out of the tree, landed on the ground, and they had, like when you jump from a height and you cushion yourself with your legs, and their rear end was sitting on their heels. Hands were flat on the ground. And I'm standing there, I'm looking at this going, man, what in the world is going on here? And I reached for my gun. I was carrying a rifle over my shoulder. I reached for it, and something just said, it's not right. So I reached for the camera that I had, so I wanted to try to get a picture, and this is all taking place in a matter of seconds. At that point in time, it took off running, and as it ran, it took its hands and reached in front of it and would pull at the same time as it ran. And it covered about a 60-yard opening in the woods in 3 to 4 seconds, faster than I've ever seen a football player. I played college football and stuff, and I never saw anybody run that fast. And I went back and I told my dad, I was like, you're not going to believe this, and told him what happened, and he was like, nobody's ever going to believe that. And I was like, well, it happened. Now, describing the creature that I saw both times, not this big gorilla that you hear people describe, and when I hear people describe a monkey in the woods, kind of Bigfoot, I cringe, because I've been face to face with these things twice, and neither time did it look like a monkey or a gorilla. It looked like a person, except their face looks more like an Australian Aboriginal. Broad nose, flat, large nostrils, very prominent lips, high forehead. The skin's the color of mahogany. You could see that like it was sun worn, but it was shiny, almost oily looking on the face. If you go back on the internet and you look at pictures of some of the Aboriginals in Australia back in the early 1900s, or late 1800s, whenever they were really being mistreated and everything, and I saw some pictures where they're in chains even. That is exactly in the face what I saw looked like. The body, probably a little over 6 foot tall, not much taller than I am, maybe 6'2", 6'3" at the most, 250 pounds, not this 10 foot tall, 1,000-pound creature that honestly couldn't live in any ecosystem in the United States, because they couldn't eat enough food to keep a body mass of that size year round. But I saw what I saw.
Yeah. Okay. So talk to me about where we are in Texas and where we are in the country as it relates to, you talked about the ecosystems and things like that. Talk about where we are now and where we're going to look tonight.
Basically, we are in deep East Texas on the Texas-Louisiana line, Panola County. I don't really want to go any deeper where I'm at, because I don't want people showing up on my property, because they will do that. They'll just show, oh yeah, I'm going to go. But this is the Sabine River bottom. And if you look on the databases in Texas of reported sightings, this area has more reported sightings than any other area in Texas. And this part of Texas is only rivaled by the Pacific Northwest for sheer numbers of reported Bigfoot sightings.
So how are those sightings reported, and who keeps the database of that?
There are several groups and organizations, private groups and organizations that want people to call or message or write or whatever and report. The BFRO is probably the largest database, Bigfoot Field Research Organization. They are a very well put together organization as far as being able to collect data and things like that, and they have collected data, far back. I mean, they've got reports on there from people that are gone now, so they've been doing it a while.
Okay, so talk to me about the shows about Texas history, lost Texas history. Talk to me about historical encounters, some of the most famous ones that you can kind of recite for us.
The first one that I really remember hearing about and reading about was the wild man of the Navidad. Back in the early 1800s, there was reports of people that lived in this community, and things would go missing from their homes. Pots, pans, utensils, things like that. Sometimes even tools would go missing from their sheds. And sometimes those tools would be brought back. The pots, the pans, they'd be gone for a week or two, and then they'd get brought back. Sometimes the tools were broken whenever they were taken, and they were fixed when they came back. And it was a lot of speculation on what was doing this or who was doing this and things like that. And one day there were some gentlemen that were out hunting with their dogs, and they treed a wild man in a tree with their hunting dogs. And I'm not an expert scholar on the wild man, but this is just what I've read. So it ended up being a female. So it wasn't a man, it was a female. Hair all over its body, long hair. They captured it. They brought it back and basically kept it in a cage or whatever for a length of time. And that was the first one. And there's a lot more to that story, but that story never just grabbed my attention like the Davy Crockett story. Everybody knows that Davy Crockett is famous from being from Tennessee, fresh from the backwoods, part snapping turtle, part alligator. He was also a politician. And whenever he left politics, he was coming to Texas. Texas, he had heard, it had a little squabble going on with Mexico, and he was coming to the Alamo and bringing a few folks with him from Tennessee to come help out Texas when its independence. And along the route, he had to go through Nacogdoches. While they were encamped coming through Nacogdoches, they were having to clear trail as they were coming through. And according to a letter that he wrote his brother-in-law, Abner Bergen, he had been chopping some brush, a log, and had stopped to eat his lunch whenever for lack of a better term, what he called an ape man appeared in front of him. He had a tussle with it, and during which it spoke to him and told him to depart from Texas or you will die. This is in late 1835. Well, everybody knows what happened in 1836 at the Alamo. Davy Crockett actually fought and died at the Alamo.
You've heard stories like the Davy Crockett story. You have things you've seen. Talk to me about your belief as it pertains to, is there something out there, and if there is it a species that is, that runs up and down the river bottom? Talk to me about what we're talking about here.
I come from a very grounded, logical wildlife background, and there's a lot of speculation on what these creatures are. Now, I do believe they exist. I've seen it. Something's there. Now, what it is, just theoretically, I think they are a relict hominid species, no different than some Native American tribes or us even, just as much removed from us as we are from any other race of people. I think that there's not nearly as many of them as a lot of TV shows want you to think there are. Some TV shows want you to think every patch of woods in every state in the lower 48 and in Alaska has a Bigfoot or some type of creature like that around every corner. I don't think that's the case. I think they are very sparse. I think they're very limited in population. They follow food. I think they're nomadic. And I think they're very highly intelligent. I think these creatures are every bit as smart as we are as human beings. And if we could imagine having a human being, say, with an IQ of about 130, which is genius level IQ, and you did not waste that IQ on video games, TV shows, radio, books, anything like that. Every bit of that intellect was based on avoiding human beings, finding food, shelter, surviving. So you take someone with a genius level IQ and let every bit of that intellect be toward surviving and being unseen. It's not hard to believe that, they could remain hidden if there's not very many of them. Now you go to saying there's, 150,000, 200,000 of these creatures in the lower 48 or whatever. It'd be hard for them to stay hidden. But if you drop that number down to say maybe 15 or 20,000 across the entire lower 48 and Alaska, then that number, that's like needle in a haystack as far as the millions of square acres that we're talking about.
So let's talk a little bit about, we always kind of relate things back to history. And you talked about how, in some things even Chris heard, that, sightings and reports of these things go back millennia. Do you think that they in any way, their existence has had any influence on the way things shaped up in history? For example, you talk about Davy Crockett and an ominous warning with speech even. I mean, do you think that in any way any of this has had any sort of play in decisions that were made or Texas history or anything like that? Just kind of relate their existence to Texas and history for us for the purpose of the show, basically, is what I'm trying to get.
I would say that, definitely, if take somebody like Davy Crockett that wasn't afraid to, he wasn't scared to look foolish if he said something like that. You have to wonder how many other people may have been talked to or had an encounter with something like that told them to do something or warned them about something or many things. I know it's not Texas or Bigfoot, but the Mothman, it's supposed to appear whenever there's very ominous things that happen, the bridge collapsing where it was at and all of those things. So there's always that possibility. I'm a spiritual person. I believe in the Bible and angels and all of those things. And back in biblical times, it was not uncommon for an angel or for a messenger of God to appear before man and warn them, or it's like the angels came to Lot and told him leave Sodom and Gomorrah and everything and get out of here and don't turn around and look. And his wife turned around and looked, and she turned into a pillar of salt. Now, people may or may not want to believe that. That's their personal right, their belief, whatever. But me personally, I kind of take it to heart that, maybe if angels or things appeared and gave warning to humans way back then, maybe they still do.